Hey, Sea Life, we are so glad to have you joining us as we have this community group discussion video and want to just help you to have some great discussion about what we talked about this past week. And so I am here with Joe Paris, and Joe is the Sunnyvale campus pastor.
Yep.
And we want to just lead you in a little discussion and have a little conversation and let you kind of sit in on it. And maybe we'll all learn something together, huh, Joe?
Yeah, sounds
right?
good. Sounds like the plan, at least.
Yes,
and
right.
About.
We'll see how it goes,
Yeah.
okay? So this week we're talking about, the series is church building. And it's not church building like we're building a building kind of church building. It's church building like when Jesus said, and I will build my church.
Yeah.
And when he said that, that word that we translate as church literally meant called out ones or congregation or assembly. So he was talking about building a people.
Yeah.
Not a place, but building a people.
Yeah.
And he said the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And so really what we're doing in this, the rest of this series is really talking about what are the essentials of church. What are the essentials of this thing that we call church?
Yeah.
And so this week we're talking about worship, that one of the essentials of church is the worship of God. And so, Joe, my favorite, I think worship is one of those things that gets misunderstood a lot.
Absolutely.
It gets, we talk about it wrongly a lot of
Yeah,
times,
yeah,
so it causes people's brains to be confused about what worship really is. And my favorite definition of worship, I've been using since I was in college, is that worship is our response to God. Worship is always a response.
Yeah.
God moves first and we respond.
Yeah.
But worship is our response to God, both personal and corporate, so it can happen me by myself or it can happen in a big group of people, for who he is and what he's done.
Yeah.
That we worship God for who he is, that's his character, and we worship him for what he's done, that's his action in the world, expressed in and by the things we say and the way we live.
Yeah.
And so, how does that definition hit you? What do you think when you hear
No,
that?
and I agree with you. I think a lot of times when, even as pastors, we mistakenly think of worship as just singing. And so sometimes even as pastors we'll say, well, let's worship again,
Yeah,
and it's
right.
like somehow
Right.
we stopped worshiping because we weren't singing. But I love that definition, because when I think about worship, it's not just singing, it's not even just church, it's about everything that we do gives worth to God. And so when we're doing everything unto the glory of God, and so that could be enjoying our family, that could be serving, that could be worshiping at church through song or through the word or through prayer. Worship isn't just something that happens when you're singing. It happens every single moment of the day when you're giving
Every
God.
single moment of what?
Every single moment of the day when you're giving everything
said
back
the
to God.
day.
The day.
Yeah.
That's my Australian accent.
Yes, that is very good. Yeah,
So,
right. And,
yeah.
and I think that's important to say that worship is anything that we do that is a response to God's revelation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you see God's character and you're convinced that God is great, and because you believe God is great, you take some kind of action.
Yeah.
That because God is loving, that's revealed to you. You get that part of God's character. So because God is loving, you act in a loving way towards your neighbor.
Yeah.
That's an act of worship right
Absolutely,
there.
Absolutely. When God gives you a gift or an ability or an opportunity and you use that, you're expressing back to God, man, I'm so grateful because you're such a good father that you gave that to me. You gave me that opportunity. You gave me that blessing. You gave me that gift. On Christmas morning, the thing that I love most about my children is that they appreciate what they've given. That gives me worth. As a father, that makes me feel like a good father because they're receiving what I've given them.
Right.
And so it's not this song, it's not this moment of singing, it's everything that we do when we're giving God.
So
his
give
worth.
us, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but give us
Yeah.
5 or 6, just 5 or 6 practical ways outside of singing that you think are kind of broad categories that people worship in.
Yeah, I think in this one, I think people miss a lot of times enjoying simply what God has given them. And so when you're out in the mountains, or I know you just came back from, you were skiing in Colorado,
Right.
And you talked a little bit about just, man, you feel God on a different level when you're in that, because I think you're going, man, what an amazing God we serve.
Yeah.
That he created all of this. And once again, you're all by yourself and you're just reflecting, but God is getting the glory for that, for his for being a creator, for being a loving God, for being a God that gave you that opportunity. I think when we use the gifts that God's given us in work and in play, it's saying, hey man, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this team, or to work at this company, or to be able to have the ability to work. I think there are so many points of the day where we can worship God just by being thankful and grateful, and then exercising those opportunities. And then hopefully at some point somebody goes, man, you're just different. You go, man, I'm just so grateful for what all God's done in my life.
Right. And I think so when somebody shares their faith,
Yeah, sure.
that's worship,
Sure.
because they're responding to, this is what God's done in my life. When you give a testimony, when you say, man, you would not believe what happened in my life last week. Man, this is what God did. Or when you tell a story about, man, I can't, you would never believe who I used to be, and this is what was going on in my life. And God came into my life, and this is what God did, and this is how it changed my life. Those are all really great examples of acts of worship. Another one is when you give back to God. When you give in the, when you put money in the offering basket at the back, or you write a check, or you go online, that's an act. That's a very clear act of worship, because it's because of you, God, because of you. I want to give this back to your kingdom.
I think a good way for people to remember this is worship is ascribing worth to God. It's telling him that he's worthy. And so whenever you feel like, hey, I'm giving God praise, or I'm telling how good he is, I'm telling how worthy he is, that is worship. And so that is a great way that I've used it, is that whenever somebody is talking or doing something and it's pointing towards Jesus Christ, that is worship, because people are going, man, your God must be amazing for you to do that.
Well, so one of our key verses this week is 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, that says, for you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God. And then it adds this on, it says, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. That worship becomes our privilege, and I love that little phrase in there, that you may. Worship becomes our privilege.
That's good.
Because of what God's done in our life. He called us out of darkness. He's adopted us as his own. We're now his chosen ones. So now it's our privilege to declare his praises into the darkness, and declare his marvelous light in the midst of a dark world. And so, that's kind of an overview of worship. Now, I think there's a special place that Scripture gives for gathering to worship, and this has been a little bit of a difficult thing for us in this time, because you've got the whole pandemic thing, you've got church shut down, or lots of people uncomfortable with coming.
I've heard about that.
You've heard about
read
this
a couple
little thing
articles.
happen. So, what I noticed is that I think that for me personally, I can sit at home and watch the sermon and feel and really feel like I get just as much out of it, pretty much. But the part that I missed, the part that I really missed when we weren't meeting in person, was just being in a room with other people, singing to God, just singing praise to God, just telling God how good he is. And I think it's
the number one thing people tell me when they come back is, I've missed corporate worship. And what they mean by that is just the singing with one another. And I mean, I've done this before, where I'm in a sermon, or I'm in the church, and I just see somebody and they just motivate me, because it's just like, man, they're feeling it. Like, they are just engaged. I don't know what they've gone through that week, but they needed to express this today. And it just fires me up to be encouraged, to be like that, to follow in their suit, whatever it is. And I think we can all attest to that. There have just been people, we just go, man, they helped usher me into the presence of God, into worship.
Well, and in the book of Hebrews, it tells us that we're to not neglect meeting together. Now, I think meeting together can take a lot of different forms. In the early church, it probably didn't look like, very often it did not look like what it looks like for us. It was, maybe 10 people in a home somewhere, or 15 people in a home somewhere. That was what it looked like for them not to neglect. So some of not neglecting takes place in a community group.
Absolutely.
Hey, we want to be with these other people, and in that time, hopefully in your community group, you're having some times of worship, and that may not be singing. It may be, hey, let's talk about what God's doing in our lives, and that's an act of worship.
Absolutely.
But when we gather together, when the church comes together, when the people of God, the called out ones, the congregation gets together, there's something really powerful that can happen too,
Yeah.
as we sing and as we and even in a sermon. I mean, as
Yeah.
hard as that might be to believe,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
even in a sermon that. We've all been in rooms. You and I have been in rooms that somebody comes in and somebody is just an expressive worshiper, and I don't mean like overly expressive worship,
Yeah.
but they're
I always think an encourager.
Yeah,
they
right.
say, I just feel like they're behind me and they are pushing me, and I'm like, man, I just want to give my best because I feel like they're receiving it, and it's just this really cool moment where you just feel like they're feeding off you and you're feeding off them, and it's just like, man, God is just being glorified through this whole process. It's
right.
pretty cool.
Right, and so that's what it says in Hebrews, that it says to not neglect that, but to keep doing it, to encourage one another, to encourage one another. And so one of the things that I think people that are believers need to understand is their responsibility in worship, in congregational worship, isn't just that I would go and it's certainly not that I would go and get something, even though oftentimes that happens.
Yeah.
And it's not even, I don't believe, that I'm going to go and give something to God. And I think that's probably closer to good than just I'm going to get something.
Yeah.
But it's also, I'm going to go and I'm going to help other people give something to God.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and my activity, my engagement, my involvement is going to spur on some other people to say, I'm saying, man, isn't God good? And somebody else is over here going, oh man, he is good, and it causes a ripple effect for other people to be able to hop on and go, man, you're exactly right. God has been good in my life. And that's contagious and builds up towards the worship of God. So
yeah, and I think we've probably lost that in the 21st century, where we've gone from, in the first century, it was very communal. Like people did stuff together, and we've become a little bit more, not isolated, but we kind of do things by ourselves. But I think church should be the one place that we never become isolated, that we're always coming back together to spur one another on in good deeds, as the Scripture tells us to do.
Well, that's good. If you're meeting in your groups, I would like to encourage you to just have some good discussion around this topic. Maybe it would start with, hey, what are some other ways that you worship in your life? And what are some ways that you need to be more purposeful about worship in your life? And then also to talk about, hey, in congregational worship, what helps you to worship? Like, what is it that really encourages you when you're in a congregational setting? Thank you so much, Joe, for the conversation. And thank you for joining us. We hope you have some great discussion around this topic. God bless you.